Marketing of sports is one activity. Marketing via sports is another. And I needed a term to describe the phenomena, and I coined the term sponsorship-linked marketing to talk about this orchestration of marketing activities around a contract.
Welcome to A History of Marketing. I'm Andrew Mitrak, and today we're visiting the world of sports and sponsorships with our guest, Bettina Cornwell. Bettina Cornwell is the Philip H. Knight Chair and Head of the Department of Marketing at the Lundquist College of Business at the University of Oregon. Cornwell is a leading expert on corporate sponsorship in sports, arts, and events. Her deep knowledge is captured in her book, Sponsorship in Marketing. The brand new third edition comes out on May 1st, 2025. And I actually read an earlier edition of this book to prep for this interview, and I really enjoyed it. So be sure to check it out if you like this episode. And this conversation is an absolute blast. We cover some of the best known successes and failures in the world of sports and sponsorship. Now, here it is, my conversation with Bettina Cornwell. Bettina Cornwell, welcome to A History of Marketing.
Thank you. This is a great idea. I love it.
Thanks. Well, I'm so excited to speak with you because you spent a lot of your career in sponsorship-linked marketing and marketing that's affiliated with sports. And this is just a topic that I find so interesting, but we haven't covered yet on this podcast. So I'm really looking forward to digging into this topic with you. But to start off, I'm just curious, what originally drew you to this area of marketing research?
Yeah. So, and I like sports, and I was attending a tennis match, and I met the VP of North America for Volvo. And at that time, they were filling their cars out in front of the match, with tennis balls and having people guess, how many balls were in there and things like that. But that person said to me, "Hey, we'd like to have a more sophisticated measurement of our sponsorship value." Our CEO said demographics of tennis players and demographics of Volvo, drivers match. And so we're here, but we'd like to measure it. And I'm like, yeah, great idea. I love it. So that's how I got started. Mm.
That's great. So just from that initial relationship of seeing how do we measure the impact of sports marketing, and how did you get connected with the folks at Volvo initially?
Just happened to be in the same section talking to people. And yeah. And you reflected on it and you thought, here's a major corporation that is super involved with this. And really, it's not on the, if you will, the academic radar at all. And then looking around, once you sort of it became salient for you. You're like, this is everywhere. This is happening. And nobody's really paying attention to it. Yeah.
It is everywhere. It is something that we almost sort of take for granted as a given, that there will be sponsorships in sports,
Yeah.
and we don't really think of the impact of it necessarily, or a lot of people might not. So
Mhm.
if you were to kind of look to, grounding this in history, do you have any sense of when the relationship between sports and sponsorship and marketing started to merge? Like, what are some of the earliest examples of that?
Sure. I mean, you can go very far back to history if you want to talk about.
Let's go all the way back. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Gladiators being sponsored and folks putting their name on bridges and buildings. And for a very long time, there was a lot of philanthropy and just, sort of giving back to community, but it also had kind of a message on it as well. Then we came in just sort of what you would call modern sponsorship, where companies wanted to have an image platform of doing good things. And then programs in sport became, one of the ways, national kinds of opportunities. So I want to typically parallel my sponsorship activities with my products distribution or coverage where I'm available. And so a national company would like national exposure, global company, global exposure, regional. And so you try to imagine an activity where you would be recognized in some instances, and then historically very much an image of philanthropy. The IRS said, wait a minute, you're getting a lot of advantage from that. That should not be a tax write-off. That's actually a marketing activity. And then things started to change. Yeah. So It was philanthropy. It is now a marketing platform.
So you mentioned that the IRS at some point said this is not just a charitable good, and it is something that's more of a marketing activity. So around what time was that, and how did that really change how we see sponsorship?
If I had to say there were a couple of key points, one would be the initiation of sponsoring through tobacco, the tobacco industry. So the tobacco industry was thrown from advertising 1970 or so, and it's coincidental that they also started sponsoring in tennis in the same year. They were thrown from traditional television and print advertising, and they said, "Well, how can we still communicate with our audiences?" And, well, you don't want to give a whole lot of credit to the tobacco industry for bringing sponsorship into, sort of a different era. It's there. They were super successful, and other brands could look over and say, "Wow, that's really working." And then a lot of people give the Atlanta Olympics '96 as a watershed event for sponsorship. The Olympics were promoted very heavily at that point by Coca-Cola because they were super keen to have the Olympics in Atlanta, which is their headquarters. And so, people see that as a watershed event as well, where things started to change in terms of the relationship of sponsors to sport and their role in various ways.
Let's jump ahead to sponsorship linked marketing. This is a term that you use, that you
Mhm.
introduced it in 1995.
Yeah.
And a lot of listeners have probably heard of sponsorship before, but this word linked, the sponsorship linked marketing, is something that you use to distinguish it from the marketing of sports, right? Can you elaborate on what the distinction is and why you chose this term or prefer this term sponsorship linked marketing?
So, marketing of sports is one activity, marketing via sports is another. I'm marketing my product, my brand, my vision through a relationship with sport. And I needed a term to describe the phenomena, and I coined the term sponsorship linked marketing to talk about this orchestration of marketing activities around a contract that lasts 3 to 4 to 5 years, whatever, 10, a few decades even. And there's a bit of a discussion about should you use the word partnerships, and I agree that sponsor relationships become partnerships. However, to talk about it as partnerships wasn't very successful in my view because there are so many things that are partnerships. There are so many, relationships, co-branding, all kinds of partnerships. But sponsorship is quite specific in that I'm writing a contract for a relationship into the future, and it's different from being a another company sort of on par in terms of activities that you'll do. This is one group that's paying financial value to another for marketing association. So I needed a term,
Yeah.
and I came up with that one.
There are like an umbrella of activities and activations that would fit within this field of sponsorship linked marketing. What are some examples of what fits into this category?
I put it into 2 buckets, partly for business reasons, because I want to know which bucket's working, and I call, everything I spend the big bucket, which is leveraging. I have a contract and have some things written into it, but I have other things I might do where I might spend more money. And then a subset of that big bucket is what's called activation, and those are oftentimes the fun things you do where you are engaging people in kind of a two-way relationship. So my leveraging overall could include things like also advertising with, the Olympic rings because I now have rights to them, but it might also include having a kiosk or something or a village representation at the Olympic Village, which would be more of an activation. And so I group it into the big bucket of leveraging this contract, and within that, a smaller bucket, which is highly activational, two-way, exciting, fun, and brings your audience, to the brand in this context.
Just to ground listeners in an example of this, I thought it might be fun to use Nike as a case study. You are the Philip H. Knight Chair and Head at the University of Oregon, so you're not too far from Nike's headquarters, and also they're just such a globally recognized brand, and people can know obviously their connection to sports. So I thought they might be an interesting case study to look at. And if you were to just describe how their use of sponsorship linked marketing has evolved over the years, a big topic, how would you describe that?
Purely objective, I would have to say they're masterful in their use of sponsoring. They're very clever in the way they imagine how to draw people in and introduce things you don't expect. And you're like, oh, back to that watershed Olympics in Atlanta, we had a Michael Johnson, right? And they were very clever in having an athlete wearing the shoes as much as he was wearing his gold medal in the photo that went on to Time magazine, right? And those kinds of moments where they are like imagining the future, imagining what could happen and being ready for it is one of the things that they have always done well. But in terms of, you mentioned the evolution, how they changed over time, they still do those sorts of things, but they also, I think, connect more to the athlete and everyone. And around, what was it, the 2012, greatness campaign, where people were supposed to find their own greatness and connect with the brand in a moment. And it was huge, absolutely huge. That kind of democratized relationship with a sport and with people. You still include your well-known athletes and your superstars, but you don't leave out the average athlete that might be buying your brand.
The Phil Knight book Shoe Dog, his autobiography. It's a really fun read, and right from the start, when they're blue ribbon sports, he's slinging running sneakers to high school runners out of the back of his car around a track, and then they sponsor folks like Steve Prefontaine. And I grew up playing basketball, and of course Michael Jordan and their at this point a partnership with Michael Jordan is among the most iconic marketing sponsorships of all time. And of course, there's that film Air that came out that probably took a lot of liberties with some of the details of the sponsorship, but a really fun movie. One of the things that's always stood out about this relationship with Michael Jordan is that it wasn't just a flat fee; that there was incentives and royalties and Nike stock and all that stuff along with it. And I'm wondering, is that very common today that there are structures like this that are tied to performance? Or do folks like Nike usually just do more of like kind of a flat fee for sponsorships? Or how do companies think about that?
There kind of two questions and two branches to that. One, the performance or fee for performance. You do see that. You make it to the championship as team sport, and then you'll get additional money. So the performance part is there. But the relationship that leads to new products and branded products by the athlete is kind of another path of how an individual athlete or even a team can start to work with a sponsor. And sure, you see examples. Some of them are not as successful. The Kanye West, the Ye and Adidas, and what happened there. A lot of product involved, a lot of product on the shelves. It was the same kind of idea, but it didn't go well in the end.
Yeah, that went about as poorly as sponsorship could could possibly go.
Yeah.
I could see why a brand would want to align itself with a somewhat controversial person because they're the ones who stand out. They're the ones who get attention. But of course, that can go way off the deep end, like it did with Kanye.
Mhm.
And I guess what's like the cautionary tale or like the lesson learned or how a brand should evaluate? What's the right tolerance level for risk as they consider who to bet their brand on?
That's a tough one. I do think it's worthy of investigation and due diligence before you sign someone on, and then make sure that their quirk aligns with your brand if they are someone who stands out and is different. And then the more, how to say, risk averse way to proceed is to sponsor a team or a group of people where no one individual is going to make or break your day.
Jumping ahead on the Nike one, and this is sort of a fun example is Ted Lasso and Nike, that they sponsored a fictional team called AFC Richmond in a show, and I guess that's an example of a team sponsorship that's less controversial. And actually, I probably can't think of a less controversial show than Ted Lasso, which is a very feel good show. But
Mhm.
it's so funny because it's television product placement and it's pretending to be sponsorship linked marketing, but it looks exactly like sponsorship linked marketing, and it seems almost like a kind of meta sort of
I
approach to
almost said the
marketing. And
word meta.
well, yeah, I'll let you describe it. Do you have any thoughts about this, and could it be a bigger trend in the future?
People love creativity, they love things that are outside the box, but yet they still understand, and yeah, I'm sure you'll see some kinds of things like that, but you can't get as much value out of exactly that if you do it the second time. It's, clever, but we need a new variation of clever usually.
I think all of this relates to another idea that's congruence and fit. That the right brand and the right team or the right athlete, they just kind of go together in a good way. And I'm wondering, how do brands approach this? How do they approach identifying fit? Is there a measurable way where they can kind of check a number of attributes boxes and have some matrix that says yes, we're a fit, or is it more of a kind of I know it when I see it kind of thing?
Yeah, I think, in the sense of back to the history, and the early measurement of, congruence or fit was really looking for the running shoe, running event kind of functional fit. And these days, State Farm and other brands fit just fine because we're so accustomed to it. So there's been, if you will, over time, a wider acceptance of what is emic to sponsorship of sport, for example, inside the game, inside the feeling. The same kind of process happened with esports more recently. And people say, well, esports, they do these kinds of beverages, these kinds of, player consoles, whatever, but they don't do anything else. Well, now they do. They have every brand you could imagine sponsoring esports. And so over time, what is congruent has really changed. And those measures are still there. There are many of them, but we've kind of shifted over to a measure of authenticity as a good measure of how things go together, and that's that feeling you're having, like, "This works, this goes together." It seems authentic, and when you
Hmm.
measure for authenticity, and we have a scale, one of my previous PhD students, Charlton, and he and I put together the scale based on, past, studies of, authenticity. And you can say, "Oh, yeah, we're authentic. We may not be running shoe running event, but this insurance company is very much related to football," right? For whatever reasons, it's connected.
That's funny. So it seems like I would have thought that the connection between insurance and sports is that kind of a lot of people watch sports and almost everybody needs some form of insurance. And that if there's just enough repetition of it, you just kind of get accustomed to it. Like, sure, State Farm is going to sponsor this, or Geico is going to sponsor this because they advertise so much. But I wouldn't have expected that to be part of the authenticity part. And I guess what is it that could help a brand become authentic, or what are some of those specific measures that would be used to say, yes, this is an authentic brand?
And are you exactly right? Repetition, you just mentioned. And if there's enough repetition and the brands are get together long enough, one of the things that authenticity captures is history.
Hmm.
And so when you get that feeling that they've been together, then the brands in their relationship become more authentic. What would have been probably in a measure of fit or congruence, not very congruent even a decade ago, is very congruent. Like, for example, for esports. Oh, yeah, sure. Financial services, they're there. Automobiles are there. Repetition.
That's right. So it doesn't even have to be congruent right at the start, but you can almost build that congruence just by investing in it, doubling down on it, being consistent with it.
Yes. Yes. Consistency and repetition. Yes. Mhm.
This goes back to what we started off this conversation. You mentioned Volvo and measurement, and
Mhm.
when you started measuring, what was your initial approaches to measuring the ROI? How do you look at measuring the success of these?
Well, there's how do I look at it, and then how the industry looks at it.
Okay.
So, in the mid-80s, a group called Joyce Julius began, what they call advertising equivalency measurement, And so advertising equivalency says essentially 30-second advertisement in this sport program is worth whatever. And then sponsorship, if you were to sponsor in this program and you had 30 seconds of coverage, let's say in an auto race, and zoom, there goes the brand, zoom, there goes the brand, count up those seconds. Then the advertising equivalency for 30 seconds of exposure through sponsorship would be whatever it took to buy an ad. Fast forward, you have all kinds of new measures like that and a lot more technical sophistication. You can say, it's clear and in focus. You can, all kinds of companies now providing that kind of measurement. That is, however, an exposure measurement. And while advertising equivalency is huge in the industry, it's a benchmark and a way of understanding return on investment in the sense that you received something that is supposedly as valuable as this ad. So I can then put it into my ROI calculation. My problem is that we don't have more than exposure, like my purchase intention, my actual purchase, and those sorts of things. And so some of the things that we've been doing for a long time are about measuring awareness or my ability to remember the sponsor if that's what they're after. And so measuring return on objectives that are important to a brand. And then, brands can also do their own return on investment. And the brands that usually do a really good job at that are the brands that have receipts. The brands that know when you were there, you did this, like financial services. If you have a credit card and you use it during the Olympics, then they know that there were people purchasing at that time, at that place. They have a lot of information. And so some brands are really good at knowing when sponsorship is working and how it's working. Other brands have to work at it a bit more, actually sponsor primary research, have a survey, conduct research that brings together their information and sales with other information they collect from their target audience.
You use the word receipts, and if you're advertising Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Red Bull at some event, or there's some activation and you could purchase it at that same location,
Mm.
very easy, well, easier to measure that. But if you're measuring something that's longer term, like buying insurance or something where you're probably not doing that right after the game, and
That's right.
and people are measuring it that way, it's just a little squishier. There's other things you have to look at to be able to sort of measure the ROI of that.
Yeah, and moreover, if you really want to know and you're one of those brands that can't find that connection, then you've got to do additional research. And unfortunately, a lot of brands don't do that in sponsoring. In fact, it's still amazing to me the number of brands that invest a very small amount of their sponsorship budget in measurement.
One of the phrases you brought up was return on objective. And can you just define what return on objective means?
Sure, that I have, I want to measure progress toward a goal, to measure my image. How was my image? How is my image after sponsoring? What is the awareness of my product due to the sponsorship? The potential is huge for what I would call intermediate variables, not your final goal, which may be sales. But if you're, a high end automobile, your sale may not come for a month or 10 or 20. So knowing that you've got people interested in the product and they're investigating is sort of this interim step that you'd like to have and know that sponsorship is helping you develop that.
These objectives, they don't necessarily need to be purely financial. They could be sort of tangential to that. And I think one that might be interesting is that I think that this is an objective could be sustainability, that you want to associate your brand with values like sustainability. And I know you've done some work related to sustainability and its relationship to sponsorship linked marketing. So how have those things come together? Are there any examples of sustainability in sponsorship linked marketing?
So some people are now referring to that area as return on purpose.
Okay.
And so, yeah, they're trying to identify their corporate mission and purpose is in part maybe sustainable. And then how can they measure the movement toward that sustainable, behavior? Well, with this activity and sponsorship, we also plant this number of trees or, something like that. But more fully to sort of communicate the idea that we're trying to be sustainable. We may not be there yet, but we want to do that. An interesting example is the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle.
Yeah.
And the Climate Pledge Arena has now been awarded the first carbon neutral arena in the world. And so it gives us a worldwide standard, which is amazing. And then you understand that the backstory is that this is sponsored by Amazon, and you don't know what is in Jeff Bezos' heart, if it's really about sustainability or if it's about image, because some people have critiqued it as being greenwashing. But we don't know what he had in mind. We know that he had a discussion that led him to doing this in the sense that employees actually wanted more sustainability. But the fact is, it is an arena that the world can look at and say, "Wow, look what they have done."
Yeah.
And it sets a standard that other people can turn to. So yeah, sponsorship can be amazing in moving the needle in creative and different ways, and I would put Climate Pledge Arena in that bucket.
Seattle is where I'm based. It is a beautiful arena. I've gotten to see some concerts, and the Seattle Kraken play there, the Seattle Storm play there, and it is amazing. And it is funny that I don't think that it would have the same reception if it was called the Amazon Arena. I think that
Well,
even if it was still sustainable and carbon neutral and had the building certifications, if it was branded as Amazon, I think that would be a little polarizing. That wouldn't unite the city. The city is very happy about this arena.
mm, and
People
as I
feel
should
proud
be.
of it. But
Mhm,
just this in this naming, had it been named if it was the Jeff Bezos Center or the Amazon Center,
mhm.
I don't think people would quite receive it the same way.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's just an amazing example of what can be done. And I would also say that not only is the center well accepted, the arena well accepted because of its name, but it probably reflects more positively on the company because it is Climate Pledge Arena.
So speaking of arenas, I want to ask you kind of a fun question. I think it's this idea of the stadium curse that Enron famously had Enron Field just a couple of years before it imploded, and FTX Arena was a more recent example. And there's a perception that companies who name stadiums after themselves will underperform, and I think there's some perception that, oh, that company's so desperate for attention they're just wasting their money, or that people think that they might underperform or might even go bankrupt in the case of Enron and FTX. And I'm wondering if there's any merit to this, or if that just this idea of the stadium curse, even if it's whether it's true or not, could have some chilling effect on brands who are considering sponsoring a stadium.
Nah. But having said that, um, it is the case that, and we did some research on this some time ago about the value of stadium sponsoring for brands that are not very tangible. So, intangible brands, services, financial services, different kinds of things, they have a harder time seeming substantial and being known to people. And so they actually get a benefit and a value for namings rights that your tangible brick and mortar brands don't quite get that advantage. But then on the other hand, some of those companies can be more volatile than your brick and mortar long-standing company. So there might be something in that, but I don't think anything's jinxed.
Nothing's jinxed. Okay. Well, Bettina, this has been such a fun interview. Thanks so much for your time. Where's the best place for listeners to find you online and support your work?
Oh, that's a nice question. I have some things on YouTube. I had this moment where there were no materials to try and talk about sponsorship, and so I did some videos. They're out there on my new YouTube channel, and they're learning glass videos. So they're a bit curious and different, and many people have asked me about how I write backwards, and I don't want to spoil it, but actually it's technologically flipped, and so I actually don't write backwards.
Just for listeners, so I'm gonna paste a link to these also with the blog because they are so cool. It's fun to research your work and see these, and they have such a distinctive look. And I'm like, what is this? And then it's this amazing sort of immersive style of video where you're lecturing at a whiteboard, but we're also getting to see you explain things as well in a way that just visually striking and also just a way to digest the information that was so cool. So yeah, thanks for putting those out there.
Oh, I'm so glad you like them. Thank you very much. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm trying to develop my Blue Sky. I've just moved over there, so I'm around.
Sounds good. Great. We'll paste links to all those in the show notes and blog. So, Bettina, thanks so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
It has been my absolute genuine pleasure to talk with you, and I think that you doing this is just great. It's amazing.
A History of Marketing is written and produced by me, Andrew Mitrak. If you'd like new episodes delivered right to your inbox, visit marketinghistory.org. There, you can also find transcripts of every conversation, including helpful links, images, videos, and other blog posts about marketing history. You can send me an email at hello@marketinghistory.org. If you'd like to support A History of Marketing, consider leaving a review on your favorite podcasting app, or better yet, tell a friend about the show. Thanks for listening.